Hello, Internet. Gino, that Pinguino Greco, here again with another episode of Deep Listens. And today we are back to Final Fantasy XII. It's time once again to discuss this game that is very long. And I am joined, as always, by Chris Zombie Pie Redacted on this journey.
Hello, everybody. I'm here. Tired, exhausted, but here.
And we are
How are we all doing?
I'm doing okay.
That's not what you sounded like when we last talked, but okay.
We're going to get through this game. The story's good. I wish there was less of it, but we'll discuss that. And we are also joined, as always, for our Final Fantasy XII podcast by Matthew, the boss of bosses, Rory. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Good. This game is going. And before we get started, ZP, do you have emails, you said?
I have an email.
For the Final Fantasy by the dozen.
Yes, Final Fantasy by the dozen. I don't know, this was meant to be read the previous podcast, but it's been a while. Bit of a hiatus to enjoy our breaks, and now we're here to talk about a game that, like Gino said, we recognize is good. You might interpret some of the stuff that we say. We actually, I think that's also the other part of this email, is apparently people listened to the previous podcast and thought that we were being negative, like we don't like or we think that Final Fantasy XII is bad. Full disclosure, we want this game to be better than what it is.
Yes.
But it is, by no stretch of the means, even close to our last Final Fantasy game, which is Final Fantasy 13.
No.
So, Gino, maybe I think you've been the most negative, so how about you correct the record?
Let me correct the record. So, this game is not bad. I personally dislike many of the design decisions they made. But I would say that as a single-player MMO, they nailed it. It is that, all the way. I personally hate MMOs a lot. Like, most of the MMO design structure does not resonate with me. And so, this game I find off-putting in its just the basic act of playing it in a lot of ways. However, it has an excellent story. It has excellent art. The music, I think, is kind of... The music's okay.
It has good characters.
It has good characters,
As much as we complain about Vaughn, the
He's
total
barely in
package...
it.
Yeah, the total package of these characters, they're good characters. I think Balthier, Bosch, and Ash are some of the best characters we've seen of the PlayStation 2 era of the Final Fantasy games.
Yeah, and all the rest of the characters are barely in the game, so the bad ones you barely hear from. And I think that the gameplay, even for its kind of MMO leanings, it has moments of highs. Like the license system is good. I think that the how you upgrade your characters in terms of getting equipment and changing up your characters' playstyles, I think that's all solid. Even the moment-to-moment gameplay can be entertaining from moment to moment. It's just that there's so much. Do you watch King of the Hill at all? Have you ever, either of you watched King of the Hill?
I did.
Not me.
Okay. Do you remember, ZP, the episode where Bobby starts smoking?
Yes, that's one of the best episodes.
It is. So
they all get pulled into this kind of Sisyphean torment.
Yes, so Rory, since you haven't seen it, Bobby, the son of the main character, he gets a cigarette one day because he's going to smoke, and he thinks he's going to be cool because he's smoking. And Hank Hill catches him smoking, and he says, "Oh, you think you're going to be cool smoking, huh? Well, let's see how much you really like smoking." And he buys him a carton of cigarettes and says, "You're going to finish this carton by the end of the day, son, if you want to be a real smoker." And he thinks that this will make his son so sick that it will get him off of smoking. And that's how I feel with this game. I'll be like, "Oh, I like this. I think I like playing this game. I like it." And then Final Fantasy XII is like, "Oh, you think you like this, huh? What if you play this for the next, 10 hours just to get to the next location? You're going to be wandering around, running into random battles. And that's all you're going to get to do before this story advances." There's just a lot of moments where this game just wants you to play a lot of it.
Yep.
And it could, if it was half as long, I think it would be better. But we'll see.
It's hard to tell because I think we're nearly at the end from where we're talking about today. So I think we have one or two more podcasts in us. But it's a long game. And again, we have different versions of the game. Playing at 4x speed, I don't think I could go back to the original PS2 at this point.
Yes, 4x speed sounds delightful. And that's my own doing. I wanted to slog through the longer version of this game just because, one, I owned it, and two, I thought just having the perspective would be good. So I took this upon myself. I knew I was hurting myself. But I think definitively I can say, if you have the option to play the PS2 version or the Zodiac version, play the Zodiac version. Like, the times 4 speed is not just a lifestyle choice. I think this game is slow without it. Like, in a big way.
The only thing I want to add on top of that is, in comparison to every other Final Fantasy game outside of 14 that utilizes real-time or pseudo-real-time combat, this is a mechanical or gameplay high point, because it's all downhill from here.
Oh, yes.
Because they didn't figure it out in 10.2, they didn't figure it out in 13, 15 is kind of a slow car accident, and everything that I hear about future games, like that footage of the Final Fantasy VII reboot, doesn't look great either. So in terms of gameplay, it's still not quite there, but this is kind of the happy medium of like old school Square Enix, old school sensibilities meets new age, real-time, open world design.
Yeah. This was the point where Square said, well, no, I guess 11 would be the point where Square said, what if the game played itself?
Yeah.
And for some reason, for like 15 years after that, they decided that all of their games should just play themselves, and you should just watch them.
I will tell you, I know that there are a lot of people who are super positive about 15. I am not looking forward to playing that game.
One day.
Because I just don't.
We'll see. One day. Maybe when it goes on sale.
But, yeah. So, we might sound a little down on Final Fantasy 12, but it's because we love it.
Yes. It is a good game. It just, there's a lot of it, and sometimes when you hit roadblocks in this game, the answer is grind more. And I don't like when that's the answer, personally. So, ZP, we got an email.
We do.
It was sent to you, so I will leave it to you.
So, this is an email from Dick Savid, who says, sorry that I haven't been commenting on blogs as well as the podcast. I just needed to take a bit of a break, and I'm trying to reduce my exposure to the internet as well as social media. Good decision.
Good call.
I wish I could do that. Anyway, I just saw this new trailer for Dissidia Final Fantasy NT. This is the trailer I sent to you, Gino, maybe 2 months ago.
Yes, I saw that.
And the selling point Square Enix is trying to get people interested is kind of perplexing, to say the least. The title of the trailer is called Dissidia Final Fantasy NT is Different. And it then proceeds to use quotes from reviewers that either share negative opinions about the game or befuddlement as a positive. Square Enix has also used this same tactic when trying to advertise games such as The Quiet Man, and I was wondering what you feel like this says about current-day Square Enix. Thoughts? Have a lovely day, David. I think that it's just a sign that Square Enix has no idea or no clue. I mean, this is the studio that sold Hitman and couldn't make Hitman a financial success story. And they bought Eidos because they thought that that would be a great investment into the European and Western market. And they got absolutely nothing out of that other than Tomb Raider, which they then signed to an exclusivity deal to Microsoft, which was weird. But hey, whatever, get your money, get paid. And since the previous podcast, the development team, it sounds like, for Final Fantasy has kind of imploded. What was the story? Final Fantasy 15 fired almost all, or like there was a mass exodus of sorts?
They definitely cut down on the DLC plans. I think they had a lot of DLC planned, and then they kind of rolled a lot of that back. I mean, they've been rolling out DLC for 2 years after that game, and it's not really worth keeping it installed that long, to me at least.
Well, Rory, you're the one who has played Final Fantasy 15. All of that DLC doesn't look like what you want out of Final Fantasy 15. It doesn't look great, and the thing that I just am continually befuddled by is I don't know what direction they're trying to take their company in. Do they appeal to the niche base audience that got them to these meteoric heights, or do they appeal to the mainstream audiences?
The thing is, it's not niche. Like, the audience that propelled them in through 7, 8, 9, 10, even 12 to some extent, like, one of the secrets to Final Fantasy is it has a pretty broad base of enjoyment, like, of gaming franchises. I think that it probably has some of the broadest, like, gender equity among its fan base. There are a lot of women that are into Final Fantasy games just because of the strong story, the strong characters. There's a lot more representation in these games than in most. I think that it does well pretty much across the board in terms of regions too. It's got a pretty strong foothold in Europe, Asia, and the US. So why they've kept leaning into this kind of action gamey style and just all these weird changes of genre, I don't get. I don't understand it. Except that, like you said, they don't really understand who their audience is, and they don't seem to have ever known. It seems like it's been happenstance that they were successful in the first place. Like, for example, that trailer for Dissidia NX?
NT.
I played the original Dissidia. It's a weird fighting game, a very weird fighting game. I don't especially enjoy the way that game plays, but it made a little bit of sense. But taking that kind of arena combat style of game and then making it a 3-on-3 like role-based combat game,
like Tekken Tag in a way,
but not even tag because you're all on the battlefield at the same time and like summons and things come onto the field. It's a really specific design that it hasn't shown up in any other type of fighting game that I've ever seen, a 3-on-3 fighting game. And because of that, you've created this very odd game with high requirements in terms of the numbers of players who have to be playing to enjoy the game at all. And also you've made the combat style and the gameplay style so different than what people who are fans of these games expect, but also different from what like a fighting game fan would expect. So you've made this thing that it has the flavor of a game that a fighting game fan may or may not care about, and it has the gameplay of a game that a Final Fantasy fan probably doesn't care about. So you've managed to alienate both fan bases? It's weird. And it's extra odd considering, I mean, we've gone into the FF trading card game a little bit, ZP. That game is basically like Magic the Gathering with slight changes that make it more, I think, more approachable, more accessible. And that game is designed in such a way that it has an easy on-ramp from another very popular game and has flavor that you can appreciate. So there it's like, hey, if you're into this other thing that makes sense, here's something with the characters you care about, and the gameplay's a little bit different. I don't understand why they went so darn far with Dissidia, especially because like Dissidia 1 and the sequel to Dissidia, both of those are like, they're a little odd, but they're one-on-one combat games. This one goes all the way out there.
I think that kind of hits home what I think is, like, at some point Square Enix really needs to have this long conversation about, they've been trying to add complexity to their games when I think that Final Fantasy is the Steven Spielberg of JRPGs. It's meant to have high production values. It's supposed to have a level of accessibility that allows it to be a mainstream success. And it has certain tropes and idioms that have defined the entire franchise since its inception. Certain iconography that has remained a part of the franchise since its inception. But somehow Square keeps trying to add in unnecessary complexity. For some reason, they continue to think that they need to have these kind of deep MMORPG tropes and kind of gameplay mechanics.
They keep biting other genres instead of just looking at what other RPGs are doing. That's what's the most baffling. You could take lessons from other JRPGs, other turn-based games. Even something like BioWare, like the way that those games play, either thinking of Mass Effect or Dragon Age, those sorts of games. And I think FF12 and Dragon Age, they share some kind of similarities in terms of how these games play. But as they've gone, 13, 15, even games into spin-offs now that we're talking about, it feels like they're acting like other games don't exist. and they're not there to be learned from. It makes me wonder if they play other games. But we'll see. I mean, that's where I'm at. I don't think that Dissidia game, it looked interesting. I wish I could play it. It's on a PS4, so I don't have a PS4. I can't play it. But it looked interesting from what I saw. But, man, it seems like they're throwing stuff at the wall and just hoping it sticks.
There's something to be said about the current state of Square Enix as a company, and I continue to enjoy to see how they evolve, both for the better and for the worse. The fact is that, like, you still need to watch the movie version of Final Fantasy 15 just to know what the fuck is going on in the story. Like, I don't even know what they are anymore.
Yeah, Rory, anything to add, or shall we move on?
I have no idea anything about the fighting game text, unfortunately. So, yeah, I get what you're saying. Honestly, the idea of a Final Fantasy fighting game has never really super appealed to me, so I've never really looked into it too much.
Yeah, it just seems like there's such low-hanging fruit, you know? You could just make a regular fighting game with these characters. It wouldn't, like a DBZ-style fighting game, just, outsource this to Axis Systems or something. The BlazBlue people, they like anime fighting games. Just do that. Cloud, Squall, put them in there. But no, it's got to be. Wasn't the Dynasty Warriors team the team that worked on this last?
I believe so.
Dissidia game.
Yeah, it's not. To be perfectly honest, I also don't think it's a major point to dwell upon. I mean, Square's going to do what they want to do. They've always blazed their own path, and I think that's part of the reason why I kind of love them for it.
Yeah, that's true.
Although I will say that, like, Square outside of Square is a teeming dumpster fire. Like, the Eidos brand has
those
been...
Hitman games are good.
Yeah, but then again, they're like, nah, you guys can go and do your own thing, and now you don't need to have to graft the episodic format onto your game anymore.
Okay, so let's head into Final Fantasy 12. When last we discussed Final Fantasy 12, a ship blew up because they tried to use the Nethicite. They put it into the ship's engine.
Defected Nethicite?
The day-affected Nethicite.
Day-affected Nethicite, the Dawn Shard from King Wraithwalt, who had a sword that could destroy the Nethicite.
Yes.
Because the Nethicite is dangerous.
And it blew up a ship.
Damn, man.
It blew up a ship.
Damn. This game has some proper noun syndrome problems.
So they blew up a ship, and we escaped narrowly and went back to Rabanasta in order to go meet... what are these guys named? The Galoof? Garif. The Garif.
Garif. The Evilise version of Native Americans.
Yes.
Which I just want to say, like, I know this is a 2018-2019 perspective being applied to a game from over 10 years ago, but one of these days I'd like to see video games kind of take the Black Panther approach of a society can honor its ancient heritage and culture while also being technologically on par with the rest of society. And the Garif, as well as the Bunny people, which we're going to talk about soon, like the idea that they have to make this false dichotomy of honor our culture, honor our religion, or be technological. It just kind of preys into that naturalistic fallacy, that kind of noble savage fallacy. Like, in order to be one with the environment, you have to reject all forms of technology. I just want.
But they're strong with magics.
I'm glad that video games and movies are starting to understand that there can be that nuance, but it's just something that I noticed. It's just, especially when we get to Fraun's character arc. Boy. But yeah, with the Garif, I like them. I like them as characters. One thing that I will say about Final Fantasy XII is I don't think I have ever seen a Final Fantasy game have this many one-off environments that have no real gameplay purpose other than watch a series of cutscenes. This game has them more than Final Fantasy X, more than Final Fantasy IX, more than any other game I've ever seen in the Final Fantasy franchise.
my big problem with the fact that A and B are reversed for like progress versus back out, like cancel is A, move forward is B on like a Xbox controller. I have skipped cutscenes because I pause them and I come back and I hit, I think I'm hitting to go back to the cutscene. Yep. I'm actually hitting skip. I've had this happen multiple times and it's really frustrating.
So, Rory,
it's got to be extra fun because the controller. So I think that's because it's mapped from a PS2 controller, where circle in Japan is accept and X is cancel, and they then map that onto an Xbox controller. So you're like 2 steps removed.
It's fine. I get that. That's how they do it over there, but I wish there was a way to reverse that here because I'm playing other games and I'm actually fucking up my other games. Like I'm playing Ni no Kuni 2, the DLC, and I'm just like baffling through the menus because I'm so used to what I'm playing in FF12. It's really frustrating.
I'm glad you mentioned this, Rory, because I think you and I are in the same boat, and we've talked about this before. The PC version of Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Edition, might have some of the worst mouse and keyboard controls I have ever seen my entire life.
It's terrible.
Damn.
And you've played other Final Fantasy games on PC.
I played 8 on a mouse and keyboard. I played 7 on a mouse and keyboard. 7's probably maybe almost on par. But holy shit, the mouse and keyboard support for this game is horrible.
Almost unusable. Like I can't even fathom how this was the thing they came up with to make this work. Like it's borderline unusable.
Like the thing that keeps getting me is I'm trying to like Steam chat with people while I'm playing this game, and
how dare you?
Left shift is the toggle button for whether you want to run or walk. And while I'm Steam chatting, if I use the shift button, it toggles in game whether or not I'm running or walking. And so I'll be in the middle of a battle, hit pause, shift, come back to the battle, and now my characters are walking while they're getting just wailed upon. Control is an important thing. Like, the thing that constantly gets me is, like, when a character dies and they're the party member, and it's like, switch to the next character. It's like, fuck, I can't, which button? Like, sometimes shifting between the list of characters is 1 or 3. Sometimes it's J or K or L. Sometimes
Are you actually using the MKB for this? Because I would have died if I had actually played this with a mouse and keyboard.
As I have said, even with Gino, I live on Mount Wasdi and I will die on Mount Wasdi until the sun goes down. I'm still playing the game on mouse and keyboard, and it's not a fun time. The fact that I cannot change the key bindings on this thing, I can change the key bindings, but as with any modern Square Enix game, it's just a pain in the ass to change the key bindings. So I am still playing the mouse and keyboards. I have the benefit of not playing any other games that are role-playing games. But here's the deal. We talked about how like Final Fantasy has gone into this direction of like real-time combat and that more MMORPG style. That's fine. I'm okay with that. I've come to terms with that. However, if Square wants to have its real-time combat that's inspired by MMORPGs, they seriously need to ditch this fucking menu system, like scroll down and click menu system, because I would love if I could use hotkeys or the function keys to like hotkey attacks, like this was Diablo or World of Warcraft, and you can do that in Final Fantasy XIV. Why the mainline games don't have hotkey options or like use your attack?
At the very least, the version you guys are playing, right? Like
it just baffles me that there's no hotkey function in any. It's not in 13. Is it in 15, Mr. Rory?
Hotkeys, I don't know. I played with a controller for 15.
But it's the idea that they're married to this menu system, and it's completely the opposite of what you would want to use in real-time combat.
I think it's especially egregious here because unlike other games, there are multiple types of magic and techniques to get into in this game, and there are many that are very, very necessary for moment-to-moment gameplay, like Cura, to heal your party, or haste is something you're going to need to apply a lot. Now, gambits can get you a lot of the way there, but there are definitely times where, due to your MP constraints or because of just a hot moment in battle, you want to stop your character from doing one thing and jump to another, and that requires you to go 2-3 menus deep to get to the abilities you want. And if it's something that you're going to need to cast over and over again, either you need to dedicate a gambit to it, and then it's somewhat out of your control, or you need to just keep menuing, and it makes this game that already plays fairly slowly even slower.
So yeah, the mouse and keyboard controls for Final Fantasy XII, I don't know how a grown adult programmed them and said, man, I am good at my job. Job done. Job done. Like, I don't know how that got out of CERT or playtesting. I just don't know.
They always manage to get through CERT with all of their PC controls. I don't get it, but whatever. Like I said, it's like they don't play other games on the PC. So we were mentioning the kind of journey you take. So you start at Rabanastre, then you go to the Damaska Wester Sand, I think. Then you go to the Giza Plains.
Yeah.
And this game might have more interstitial spaces than any game I've ever played before. Like, you spend at least, what do you think, like 1/3 of the game getting from place to place?
Probably. How about that?
And it's not like the intervening areas are that interesting. They tend to just have a few random enemies that will gang up on you. Some literally random treasure chests, and maybe there'll be, like, a dungeon off of, one of these random areas. But it just feels like because it's not a world map, you're actually in these environments to scale, everything just feels like it takes forever to get anywhere. And I think that they're trying to communicate, like, your characters are traveling long distances. They're trying to fill in the map in a way that Final Fantasy X kind of yada-yada'd. But I think that they filled it in with somewhat boring content, even though I think the environments themselves can be quite beautiful in spots, and even some of the enemy designs can be nice to see in the environments, blending the enemies to the environment. But
there are a lot of deserts in this game from what I have experienced so far.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but for a lot of especially the early game, you are really walking through a bunch of sand. And it all kind of blends together, not in a great way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of deserts. There's a lot of forests that are like big, lush forests. And then there's a couple of kind of grassland sort of areas.
Grassy knolls or grassy plains, open plains. The problem is with these environments is, I'm glad you mentioned Final Fantasy X, because a lot of these levels remind me of the Calm Lands from Final Fantasy X.
Yeah, that's a good call.
The problem isn't that the problem isn't that the world is open and that you get to navigate. It's just navigating from point A to point B is long because these environments are big. And what compounds the problem even further is that it's not just one open world. You have to go from one atrium or part of the environment to another open atrium or part of the environment, to a narrow corridor, to a different corridor. And when we talk about the Giza Plains, something that makes the problem even worse is when, like, this environmental system kicks in and it completely uncouples what previous understanding you have of that environment, and now you have to relearn the environment. So you have to worry about that. And to make the matter worse, there are parts of the environment, especially the caves, which are tucked away in these benign kind of like story levels that are filled with horrible monsters which will kill you.
Yeah, immediately. And those tend to be like side quest caves. There'll be espers and things in there, and you'll kind of go back there at the late game. But if you don't know that, you just see like a question mark at a location that you're wandering through, that generally just means you'll die if you go in there.
Yeah.
So I did that. That happened to me. Is like, oh man, I bet I have to go into this cave in the Dalmasca Easter Sand or wherever it was. Went
Probably
into the
Wester
cave.
Sand.
It was the Wester Sand. Went into the cave. It's like, man, everything here is like I'm using Phoenix Downs all the time. And then all of a sudden, I ended up in a boss battle with a freaking Esper, and it killed me in like 2 moves. And it's like, well, that's fun. It's like, do I have to power level? And then I looked it up, and it's like, no. Each environment has like this no-no zone where it's just filled with cheap garbage that will kill you if you're not ready.
And there's very little way to know. And another thing that just comes up a lot in this game is the maps, like the sub-maps of each of these areas. The names of each area tend to be so specific and make no sense that navigating, even when I'm reading a guide, can be difficult. Like, for example, here's the Osmond Plains. There's only like 3 locations in this place. They are the Field of Fallen Wings, the Dagon Flats, the Switchback, and the Hollow Greens. How am I supposed to know what the fuck any of those are without looking at a map? You can't. They make no sense. Everything's got there's proper nouns inside of proper nouns.
It took me probably a couple hours to figure out which way to get to Arcades from the overland map because it just nothing made sense. I had to basically find the corner of the map that I hadn't explored yet and blindly follow it. It was really, really frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that comes up. Like you go to the Osmond Plains, and then from the Osmond Plains you go to wherever the heck the Galif live, with the Elder Knoll or the Gareth. And then they send you to Mount Bur Amistus, which is, I guess, a holy mountain, where they're one of the religious sects of this game are. But to get there, you need to go through a jungle, the Galmor jungle.
Then you have to go to the village of the Bunny People village,
Yeah,
and then
the
you have
Uriat
to
village.
retrieve a person from a cave or a mine. Oh my god, that
Oh, do you mean the
made
Henny Mines?
The Henny Mines. Finding those Henny Mines took me at least an hour because you have to ride a chocobo, and the chocobos are timed. You can't just ride them however long you want. You only have a limited amount of time. And then if you fail to find the correct location, the chocobo leaves you in the middle of nowhere, and you have to walk all the way fucking back to the chocobo person, get back on the chocobo, try again. Oh my god.
And the chocobo, there are some trails that you can only go through while on chocobo. So you need the chocobo to get to some of these places in the first place.
It really is frustrating because you don't feel like you're the one at fault when you're struggling to know where to go. You feel almost like in order to get through this game and make the progress that you want to have to play with a guide. Because the game penalizes you in your exploration of these worlds. You have to pay money just to know what the environment looks like on the map.
Yeah,
and even then,
it's worth mentioning, like, the world map shows you where these objects are in general relation to each other, but when it comes to getting around these sub-maps, just saying, like, this area that I'm supposed to go is technically north of where I am. So if I go up, I will end up there. That's not how it always works. You can end up in a spot where going north will end up at a wall, and then you need to go west or east, and then that allows you to go north. The general... It would be one thing if you could just go off of what the general compass direction that the game tells you is supposed to be the next location you're going to, but that's not how it actually plays out, and it just leads to a lot of frustration, especially because when you're at a level or in one of these areas that is around the level you're supposed to be, 1 or 2 groups of enemies I've found can put you into pretty serious jeopardy of dying. And that, or, depleting your resources and then having to go into your items. And that can just be really frustrating when you're really lost. You're actually lost. And that comes up, I think, all the time. Thankfully, I've had a guide, but were you guys using a guide to just get around?
No, not so much. But the other thing was, like, if you accept every hunt that you come across, like, sometimes you'll just run into them at random and they will murder you. Out of nowhere. So there's been some really tough areas, especially if you don't really know where you're going. You can definitely wander off into higher level areas, which is fine so much. But definitely it's been kind of a hit or miss kind of thing where they don't really have the breadcrumb kind of thing to tell you where to go. You don't necessarily need that wow kind of,
breadcrumb glowing trail in front of you.
Yeah, you don't really need to have that so much, but there's been a lot of missteps, and I feel like I've wasted hours in this game going the wrong way.
To make matters worse, every environment has like 20 different dead ends.
Yeah.
And the
And you can't tell them until you get into the dead end.
Yeah,
Like,
the
the
Osmo
mini-map's
planes-
too close.
The Osmo planes have each part of the world has a dead end, and sometimes there are parts of the world that are in and of themselves dead ends. And on top of that, like this environment in particular, sometimes the environments only have one save crystal, and it's all the way on the other side of the environment. So when you do get to a low health situation and you're not fully stocked with resources or MP, you can get stuck, like dramatically stuck, or you can die, then have to restart the entire level with no progress to show for it. Yeah, I mean, and the problem is that unfortunately, while I certainly do like the story, these levels kind of stretch the story to a breaking point. So
Yeah.
you have the Shiva, which is a highlight of that first part of the game that we played. Like watching the Shiva explode, having the drama of the story and this geopolitics. It was starting to come together.
Ash is going to step out of the shadows.
Yeah,
You're getting
exactly.
the weapons that you need. You're like the enemies coming into focus. All of the enemies are starting to get defined. You've got Larsa. All these characters are starting to come into conflict. You've been betrayed by one of your best friends. Like all these things are coming up, and then let's just wander around for a while. Let's get lost.
Yeah, and I get that the story conceit of it is like, well, we can't use Balthier's airship because they're going to get caught. But I seem to recall Balthier's airship is fucking invisible. It has invisibility, right?
The reason why you have to walk is because there's these areas that are yogged.
Oh, that's right.
What
they
that's
have
what they're
like
called?
weird mist shit, and you can't use airship.
You can't fly there.
Technology.
That's the idea.
That's fine, but I seem to recall like moving from one environment to the next was a lot more manageable in Final Fantasy X.
Yeah. I mean, because you walked out of one screen and you were in the next area. Like most of the long walks in 10 were maybe 3 or 4 screens, like 6, 7 at most. This game, it's just every single spot you need to go to. It feels like you're going through an area that's half the size of the Calmlands and teeming with enemies. And I think that it's really highlighted in this section here because you go to the Osman Plains, you get to the area you're supposed to go, then they direct you to go to Mount Bur Armistice, and then from there you have to go to some forest.
The Golmore Jungle.
The Golmore Jungle, and that
the Golmore Jungle has a barrier.
That leads you to the Iriad village where you meet like all the people that Fran grew up with, all of the bunny people. And once you beat the bunny people, they tell you that, oh, we're not going to let you through because you're excommunicated.
Yeah, you have to go to the Henny Mines.
And you have to find this person in the Henny Mines who's this other bunny person who has left the Iriad village. And that means you have to backtrack. You have to leave the jungle. You have to go back to the plains. You go from the plains to the mines. You go through the mines. And at the bottom of the mines, you fight Tiamat. And that thing fucking sucked.
Then you have to go back from the Henny Mines to the Erudite village while navigating through Golmore Jungle. Get to the village, watch a pretty long cutscene, leave the village, go through the jungle, and then now you can finally make the trek to Mount Gur Amazotz.
So, did either of you feel anything about Fran's storyline here?
Hot damn! Oh, boy. So do we want to talk about the character design for the Fran people, or do we want to talk about the story first? Because
whichever one jumps out at you more.
Boy, oh boy. Square Enix, huh? Just can't avoid designing female characters in the most despicable, kind of disgusting way. I can't even. They're so bad.
So they're basically, Fran's people are elves, but what if sexy?
What if bunny rabbits because Playboy, and what if sexy because misogyny?
But otherwise they are just the elves from Lord of the Rings. They live in the forest, they are one with the forest, they use bows, but instead they are very tall rabbit ladies who wear lingerie?
Yes.
If
As
that.
there's-
It's
If
kind of
that.
the classic, RPG armor, basically a bikini.
Yeah. One thing, I was actually playing this game, and at one point I realized that Fran wears high heels.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very practical.
She's wearing, like, basically lingerie, and still somehow she has high heels. It's amazing. Ugh. And then the actual story ramifications of this moment, you learn that she left her people, and by leaving the Vieira and leaving the forest, she's basically not allowed to come back. They have some sort of magical attachment to the forest that they live in, and by leaving, she no longer has that. So I guess the forest talks to them somehow?
Yeah.
And she can't hear the forest anymore, and that's sad.
But so the big problem that I have with Fran's Homecoming is that it's supposed to be normally in a Final Fantasy game, this would be kind of a character arc. Each character gets their own arc, or kind of the fulfillment of their arc within a given environment, and we go through all of the character arcs before we see actual progression of the story. That's what this scene is supposed to be. The problem is that the game tries to do this weird juggling act. So it needs to introduce the fact that the Draknor laboratories are doing some shady shit with Nethicite. It needs to inject Larsa and Ash's whole dynamic into the story. We got the introduction of this kind of ghost-like figure that's actually pulling the strings from the background introduced here. We have Vaughn interjecting himself, which I actually want to talk about because there's a scene here and there's a scene in the Land of the Gareth where Vaughn is just arbitrarily interjected. You got all of this going in what would normally just be Fran's character moment, a scene where we learn about her origin story and we fulfill some part of her arc. But the game's trying to do like 5 or 6 different things, and it's endemic of a problem that I have with the story. I like the story overall, but it's trying to be too much. Like, I don't need even though I like it, I don't need a story about like the usurpation of power in Arcadia with leading a resistance movement, with fulfilling your dreams with Vaughn, with a romance story arc with Penelo, with Fran leaving all of her stuff from behind, Balthier finding out about his father, Bosch needing to prove his innocence. All of these character arcs.
Oh, and his twin brother?
And his twin brother, who is like has this long-term relationship with Lord Gramus and needs to protect Lars. Just all of this shit. It's all great storytelling. I don't think there's a single, other than Fran and maybe Penelo. There's all this good storytelling, but it's too much. It's just too much. And sometimes, especially with the case with Balthier, it's like all of their characterization is conveyed in one scene, and then you just got to run with that and accept that, and then move on to the next part of that storyline.
Yeah, and I would say that the problem with Fran's section is not necessarily just that her character design is pretty weak. Like I said, it's pretty much Lord of the Rings elves, and there's not really a twist on it. They are long-lived. They do not want to meddle in the affairs of humans, and they call them Humes, but they say it exactly like you would expect the elves in Lord of the Rings. These short-lived people with their petty wars, we're not going to get involved. And they express it in the same way. They use the same language. They have the same aesthetic, and so it's just kind of rote. And her arc of being the Legolas of this story, where she's getting involved in the affairs that she's not supposed to meddle in, there's not even that moment where, she reconciles with the other members of her tribe and kind of get them to get involved and care about the world. By the end of this moment, she brings back Mjörn, who's this, I guess, her younger sister, and then talks to the leader of the village and says, actually, I'm going to leave Mjörn here. No one follow me. I'm going to be the only one who does this. You guys just hang out here and don't get involved at all. And there's this war brewing, and she's basically saying not hearing the forest is worth more than trying to save everyone else. And I just didn't find it very compelling. Like, it was a thing that happened, but it didn't move me one way or another.
Now, here's what I wanted to talk about. This is kind of the point of the game where I realized that I hate Vaughn because there's a scene in The Land of the Gareth where Vaughn gets arbitrarily interjected within Ash's moment where she's looking at like the ghost of her husband that died from the previous chapter.
Yeah.
And then Vaughn, of course, is the one that consoles her and starts talking about how he's been, I can't believe they did it again, about how he's been running away from his problems, and he just kept running away, and now he's going to be a part of this journey so as that he can confront his past and make it his own and have his own destiny. Like, it's admittedly a decent story arc. The problem is that Square has done this story arc with at least 5 or 6 different Final Fantasy protagonists, and I'm so done with it. I'm so done. I thought it was okay with Cloud. It was kind of okay with Squall. It was okay with Squall. It made sense with Tidus, but I am totally done with the protagonist, his whole conceit, his or her conceit, because you could actually lop in Lightning from Final Fantasy 13 into this group, of character running away from problem and now is on this journey to confront their past. I'm done. I'm sick of it. And then there's that moment where Vaughn has to be a tool to Fran. Did you guys remember that scene where he asks her age?
Yeah.
And just that look of disgust that everyone in the party makes. I actually like that. I thought it was great. It just shows how much of a tool that Vaughn is. And I like those moments where Vaughn gets called out for his BS.
Yeah, because he's a 16-year-old who shouldn't be here.
Yeah, he's a 16-year-old who says 16-year-old things. So I give the credit to the writing. Vaughn feels like a teenager. He legitimately feels like a teenager. The problem is,
he's involved in geopolitics.
No,
and
not even that. Not even that. His young age, his social incompetence, like his place in this story feels even put on blast where he does not feel like a legitimate protagonist.
Well, because he's not.
He's not.
When every other character is like eye rolling at him, it's hard as a player to not also be eye rolling at him, which is what I do to most of his lines.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, Vaughn is intolerable and I get that that's part of his character art. He's a teenager. I mean, teenagers are kind of intolerable, but I don't take him seriously as a character, and neither do the other characters.
I think that this is where we just get to the point where we've mentioned it in previous shows. He was not supposed to be the protagonist. Bosch was, but then due to market focus testing, they added Vaughn in. And this game is very interested in geopolitics. It's very interested in the sorts of decisions that leaders of nations have to make or do make in order to gain power, prevent conflict, prevent war. And those decisions are what this game is about in a large sense. And they grab 1/3 of your main party has no business in that and have very little to say about it. They are there for their own things. And it's glaring every time it crops up.
Yeah, it sticks in my craw how miscast Vaughn is in the story, because say what you will about Squall or Tidus, but you cannot envision someone different as the player character in their respective games.
Yeah, and I think that the problem here isn't that Vaughn and Penelo, they didn't find a way to make them work, like why they're on the quest. I just imagine a version of this game where 1/3 of your party was populated by people from Rosaria or Bujerba, like some of these other places that are caught in this conflict. If you had added 2 characters to your party from these other locations instead of 2 street urchins from Dalmasca, I think you would have ended up with a stronger game, because you would have been able to get, like if Al Cid, who's a character that gets introduced at Mount Armistice, if he was in your party.
No.
Or something like that. I think it would be more interesting than Vaughn.
I don't know. I'm not against
Or come up
Vaughn.
with another character.
I'm not against Vaughn as a character. I just don't think that he's a good cipher for the story. I mean, the main story of Final Fantasy XII is about restoring the independence of Dalmasca. And in that regard,
it's about Ash.
Ash and Bosch are the primary stakeholders. Vaughn, on the other hand, has like little connection to that plotline outside of his dead brother, which he only brings up like 3 or 4 times in the story. And I can't believe I'm going to say this. I'm going to say something positive about Final Fantasy XIII. So Gina, prepare
Yeah.
yourself. Now, we've said a lot about Final Fantasy 13,
It's a bad game.
but here's the thing. Lightning, for all of her problems, is basically the only natural-born leader in her group. She's the only person with, like, military experience.
What about Snow?
She's the
He's
only
the hero.
person. She's the only person that has, like, knowledge and understanding of that PsyCom group. Like, Vaughn doesn't even have that going for him. From top to bottom, he is completely and totally outclassed by the other characters. Like I said, say what you will about Lightning, but she's got a decent level head, and she doesn't always let her emotions get the better of her, and she's willing to look at every circumstance and situation objectively.
Yeah, I agree. So we got to move on because he's not going to get better. He will continue to be in this game. So we get to the Elder Worm fight at this point. What do you think? That's your first status effect boss.
So what I
game.
will say is this is just a reminder of how much I wish there was a copy-paste feature for the Gambit system, because what would always happen is I would go up against a boss with my normal, like, trash mob gambits, get my ass handed to myself, and then I would have to, like, completely retool my gambits for that specific boss. Then I would have to get rid of my boss gambit and then replace them or kind of remember from memory what my previous gambits were. And so what that leads to is a lot of dead time, a lot of, like, time futzing around with the Gambit system.
Yeah, I agree. Rory, did the Elder Worm jump out at you in any way?
I don't actually even remember. I've been playing this game like stops and starts. So which boss was the Elder Worm?
It's the one when you're in the Galmor jungle, when you're finally leaving, it just hits you with a bunch of negative status effects constantly, and it has 2 tree helpers that you kind of have to kill first. It's not
I might
particularly
have just
iconic.
I might have just absolutely out-leveled at that point because I've been running at 4x and just kind of grinding around a lot.
So, you skipped your favorite boss ever, Tiamat from the Henne Mines, who also is no joke.
Well, that one, so the thing is, at this point, Tiamat I was able to kill in 1 quickening chain, I think. 1 or 2 quickening chains. Because in this I think is where our versions of the game diverge really strongly. Because I have the entire license board, I have 1 license board that all of the characters are on, and all the quickenings are kind of in these weird corners of the board. I just made a beeline to those quickenings for everyone, and by this point, everyone I think had a quickening, and Bosch had a level 3 quickening. So I was able to, and because in my version of the game, quickenings are tied to your MP, if you get 1 quickening, you just have access to the quickening system. If you get 2, it doubles your MP, and you have access to the level 2 quickenings, and then if you get a 3rd quickening, you have 3 times the MP, and you can use level 3 quickenings. So by having access to those at this point, I was able to 1-shot or 2-shot this boss. The Elder Worm, I wasn't able to do that to because it just had too much health.
Oh, Rory, it's the dragon that looks like it's covered in grass and moss, the green dragon.
I do remember running into him early and getting my ass kicked, but by the time I got to him the second time, I think I just had a better gambit system, and I don't recall having any problems.
So
Yeah.
I guess maybe because Rory and I we're in the same group. How have you been handling gambits for like elemental specific? Because this definitely comes into the hunt systems or the hunts where you have to create a very specific gambit to beat this very specific boss. Otherwise, you will not be able to take advantage of its elemental weakness or its environmental weaknesses, and you basically can't beat the bass bottle.
Honestly, I've been so over leveled that I haven't really even been casting like much magic at all. So it's basically been just kind of like whack, 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 haste on everybody, and just go haste and protect on everybody, and just go to town. And we'll talk more about later areas in the segment, but for this specific like forest area, I was still just kind of wrecking everything I came across.
Yeah, and in this area, in a similar way, I am not over-leveled, but I have access to the super attacks. So I am just using that on everything that I come across that's too difficult, and if that doesn't work, I'm just kind of fucked. But it has not come to bite me at this point in the game. It will later, in later segments that we will talk about today.
Did any of y'all take advantage of that jelly grinding situation in the Henny Mines?
I did not grind jellies there.
Ooh, it was so good. One thing that I kind of, because we're getting close to Mount Burr Amazons, I just want to say that jump between your ability to complete stuff and like fight shit in the game, when you lose Larsa, your efficiency in battling drops dramatically, and it sucks that you can't like hire a mercenary or hire that guest. You can't fill that guest slot because I didn't know that Larsa was going to leave, and now every single hunt that I wanted to complete was like 10 times harder. Like having that extra person in your party and losing that extra person and not being able to fill that slot, especially when this game is so grind heavy, like I don't understand why I can't just hire someone at the bar or like have kind of like that early kind of pseudo pawn system from Dragon's Dogma. Like it's a huge drop in efficiency. Like when you lose Larsa, it is a huge, huge drop in your ability to speed through the game.
What if some of the 4 or 3 characters who are sitting on the sideline at all times could just be slotted into the 4th slot?
Yeah. Like when you lose Larsa, I don't know how if you all noticed it, but when you lose Larsa, it slows dramatically.
Yeah, this was pretty much the point where it caught up with me that I had not leveled that much, because just getting to the mountain, I died a bunch of times just getting killed by trash mobs, because all of a sudden my infinite source of high potions was gone, and one of my damage outputs was gone, and all of my characters being down on equipment and down on weapons and under-leveled, it hit so hard it was a roadblock for a while. I basically ran all the way to the mountain without fighting anything because I couldn't kill regular trash mobs without my characters getting severely damaged. And shortly after this, I had to actually grind levels, or at least grind LP, because I just couldn't get through some of these segments, which was really annoying because boss fights I actually had very little trouble with. It was just the trash mobs because I was running out of items and running out of MP. But the mountain, I think, has some of the best story moments of this part of the game. We see Vayne talk with his father about the future of Arcadia, because Arcadia is a democracy from what we can tell. There's a Senate, but there's also a sort of emperor or president role that is filled by Vayne's father, the head of House Solidor. And there's this inherent tension between the Senate, which has some legal powers, and the Emperor, who also has legal powers. And at this point, Vayne is trying to consolidate all of that power under himself, but his father very clearly has some fealty to the status quo. He believes that the people should have some voice. So there's this tension going on. And then there's also Larsa, who is incredibly naive and believes that if he just...
As I called it in one of my rough drafts, is Larsa's biggest problem is that he's white male privilege the character, because every single time he talks to someone that's technically beneath him, he talks with just this air of confidence and just total negligence and woeful negligence. Man, oh man. I get that his whole point is that he's the enlightened despot, but there are times where he speaks with so much privilege that it's painful to listen to him.
Yeah, he basically says, it's okay, person who's down on their luck. The people up top, they understand your plight. And if I just tell them the right way that you actually are a real person who needs help, I'm sure they'll make the right choice. They just don't realize that you're hungry or, you're in danger. I'm just going to explain it. If we just tell the right people the right stuff, everything will be okay, guys. And this game, I think to its credit, makes it very clear that Larsa, while idealistic and better than his brother, is not correct. He does not understand how this world works. And once you get to the mountaintop, you meet the Grand Kiltus, and he's got some magic powers. He can see. He can talk with his eyes closed while he's sleeping, and he
talk with his mouth
everything.
Closed. And then you meet Al Cid Magres of Rosaria, and boy, oh boy.
He wears his sunglasses indoors.
Alcid. Man. There are two real campy characters, and they're both named Sid. One of them works, and the other is a disaster.
So, do either of you watch Game of Thrones?
I do not.
No.
Okay. There's a character, Prince Oberyn, who is very similar to Alcid. He is also played as a Spaniard. And I think these subtle choices of what sort of voices they have for each of these characters, like the upper class folks having British accents, the lower class folks having American accents, and Alcid, the playboy, having a Spanish accent, it's kind of funny how ridiculous they're going with their accent choices. But Alcid, man.
Any impressions of Alcid, Mr. Roy?
From what I recall, he's kind of a fun character. I mean, just kind of comic relief almost. But the whole thing about, I almost entirely forget the names of all the kingdoms here. Having a third kingdom off in the side that is kind of implied or implicated in all this stuff, and wants to be involved, and having him be that avatar is kind of interesting. It's a weird character for sure.
He's a weird playboy.
Yeah.
And also, like, this kind of highlights he's another example of how this game has tone issues, because he comes in walking in like a playboy, and then he just drops the bombshell. Oh yeah, Larsa, your dad is dead. Have fun with that. And then in the first scene in which he's introduced, he's like brushing him and like patting him on the head. It's like, yeah, we've met each other and we're friends. Hope you're doing well. Oh, by the way, your dad is dead. And then, like, Larsa is just totally devastated. And the game doesn't take the time to, like, have the scene or that resonance of Larsa finding out that his father is fucking dead. It just pans to his face once, and then now we have to go on another fetch quest.
And Alcid has his swaggering moment in what is supposed to be the holiest location in the game, I think. He's in front of a religious figure, and he swaggers in with his sunglasses on with this female attendant in an odd uniform, and he's like tossing her his sunglasses and having his ridiculous flirtations with Ash and these other characters. It's odd, to say the least, and like you said, it's quite the tonal shift. And from that moment, we jump back to Arcadia, and we see that Vayne has basically killed his father, framed the Senate for his father's murder, and then because the judges, or at least most of the judges, are on his side in the coup, they play along that the Senate has killed the Emperor, and they install Vayne as the Grand Leader, essentially. It's basically a fascist coup to take down this democracy.
I like Vayne. I've warmed up to Vayne. I know in the first podcast I talked about how I thought he was a little too milquetoast. I like Vayne. I think that there are not enough interjections that kind of characterize his perspective. And I actually think that the scenes where you go to Arcadia are actually the story with Arcadia is better paced and it's better told, better paced, and more interesting than a lot of the stuff that you do in the main plot line. Like finding out that these judges are really some of them are conflicted. Some of them really don't want to follow through on Vayne Solidor's orders. And it's like they're supposed to be acting in fiduciary, but they have their own ambitions, their own aspirations. They're well better told than some of the main characters in your party, like Penelo or Fran.
Yeah, I feel like I know more about Drace, who's the female judge, than I do Penelo, like what Penelo's about. Drace wants to protect Larsa. She doesn't trust Vayne. She kind of wants the status quo to be maintained, and she thinks that Larsa should rise to power, and basically gives her life to try and protect Larsa so that Gabranth can kill her and prove his loyalty in doing so. That is a more satisfying arc than I feel like Penelo has had at this point, and Drace has maybe 4 or 5 speaking parts.
Yeah. Fun fact for those that didn't know, the people who played the judges, I wanted to look them up because I thought that for the most part the judges were some of the best acted characters in the game. It turns out that whoever was responsible for the voice casting wanted actual characters with real accents. So they hired an acting troupe from a Shakespearean group who had only ever acted on the stage. And they were not professional voice actors. And this was their first game. And some of these judges, this has been the only video game credit that they have on their IMDb page. Like, this is the only video game they've done. And they've just continued working on the stage. And I just want to say, if you happen to listen to this, you nailed it.
Good get.
They nailed this. I mean, the judges are some of the best characters. You think, based off of the way that they look, it's like, oh, here are the Darth Vader figures of this storyline. And they actually have really good character arcs. They have really good characterization. They're well acted. And, the problem is that it kind of puts some of the characters of your cast under a brighter spotlight in terms of how underwritten they are.
Yeah, and I think the important conceit here is these stormtroopers take their helmets off.
Yeah.
And when they do, you know what they're about. You see their subtle differences, and it lets them have a little bit more range. So after this, like you said, you go on a fetch quest. You go to the Still Shrine of Miriam, where you try to get this fancy sword that lets you cut nethicite. This was the point where I ran into a brick wall. I couldn't fight most of the enemies in the Still Shrine, so I went and grounded LP in the Dalmasca Wester Sand for like an hour, and then I came back and breezed through this place.
And again, when in doubt, this story more often than not uses a MacGuffin to ferret the characters from one set piece to the next. And I understand why it is, because it's during this time when I realized that a lot of the interludes in Final Fantasy XII, there are a lot of interludes. I know we haven't mentioned it, but that's when the game kind of was like, hey, buddy, do you want to do some of our side quests? Hey, man, do you want to do some of the hunts? Do you want to do some of these Espers things? You want to use the time here to do some of this shit? Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot.
There's a lot. I hear you like this. Do you want more?
The thing that, and maybe I'm out of line for saying this, but why is there no mission objective list or a mission log for the side quests in this thing?
There is for hunts.
There's for hunts, but it's hidden in the bestiary of the clan primer or like the clan primer. But there are other like the side quests in this game are pretty bad. Like, I did the Cactuar one where you just talk to a bunch of people and you solve the problem with the Cactuar. I didn't know talking to that one kitchen lady from that Viera in Rabanastre was a side quest. I just thought that it was talking to a person, but apparently that was a side quest. It's just like sometimes conversations that you have with random NPCs lead to side quests, and sometimes they're just random flavor text and you really don't understand what it was. Apparently this weird emblem that I picked up can be put together to create a medallion. Okay, whatever. Apparently this one guy that talked about how, man, we got to do something about these sandstorms that are all going through the Wester Sand. Like, apparently that was a side quest, and I didn't know because there's no list of it. And another frustration that I've started to have in terms of just knowing where to go, I would desperately like to set my own waypoints, because there's no waypoints or markers or quest markers for side quests outside of the hunts. Just being able to like look at the main map and say, put a beacon here and keep the beacon on the mini map would be so much better.
Yeah, and it's all the more glaring because they did do it for the hunts. So the technology is there. It's built into the game. They just didn't use it in all places. So this is actually the point in the game. Like I said, with the grinding, I ran into this, but this is also where money started being a problem for me. I stopped being able to afford all the latest weapons for all of my characters and armor. So at this point, I have basically been able to equip one character properly, and everyone else gets scraps. I guess you both grinded enough that this was not a consideration?
It was more of a stealing thing. Like, I think we talked about stealing before, like having one character steal at the beginning of every encounter. You'll get junk that you can sell, and some of it's really valuable. And it really does help a lot in the end run.
I just want to say, whoever decided to put the teleport stones in loot,
You can buy teleport stones.
I know, but
You can't buy.
I kept accidentally selling my teleport stones,
Nope,
and
that's terrible.
but it's in the loot thing, and I did it
Just
on
put it
accident.
in items.
I know, just put it in items. It's just why did they put that in loot?
I don't know. It's pretty glaring. The Still Shrine doesn't have too much interesting. Like, there's a couple of puzzles. You fight 2 bosses in here. Vinus Sakar? Yeah, that thing, he makes you slow. I killed him in 1 quickening.
So
It was great.
Was that thing an Esper?
No, Mateus is.
Oh yeah, Mateus.
You fight Mateus after.
So I guess because you talked a little bit about the differences between your game and our game, the thing about the Espers is that they are on the license board for our system, but they're on the license board in kind of a really interesting way. Each Esper can only be used by 2 possible classes, I think maybe 2 or 3. And Rory, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but each Esper is only available on a limited number of license boards.
Oh, okay.
So the way I would characterize it to you, Gino, is imagine, if you would, the GFs from Final Fantasy VIII, the Guardian Forces from Final Fantasy VIII, but who gets to use those Guardian Forces is defined by their character class and their one-time use permanent buffs. Like for some character classes, they unlock high-tier weapons and accessories.
Yep.
For other people, it unlocks spells that are forever tied to your character that you can use.
Yep. Like they will actually unlocking an Esper on one character will actually unlock other
sections of the grid.
license squares behind them. So you really have to know what you're doing before you unlock these Espers for your characters, because you will not be able to get what the other characters might have been able to get to after the Esper if you unlock it from one character.
Oh, wow. So basically they're like bridges in
They are
between
bridges.
gaps.
Yeah.
On
Yes.
these.
Yeah.
There are
wow,
gaps on
that's-
every license board that are only accessible if you use a Guardian Force and or an Esper. And once you use it on one grid, the other abilities will be forever locked. So it is, again, the biggest problem here is that it locks you into a blind choice that sometimes the game does not prep you for, and there's no respec option, which I keep saying that, but it really is. It really is. Like, I waited before I used Bellius because I didn't know if I wanted the black magic or if I wanted the accessory, because I feel like my character classes hadn't really developed to the point where I saw the light at the end of the tunnel for either of my classes that could have used them.
Yeah, so for me, those characters they just show up on the edges of the grid. They're on everyone's same license board, but only one person can get them. And some of them kind of end up in sections of the grid that bridge between different quadrants, kind of. Like, there's some sections that if you get it, it will allow you to go from some of the weapon area to the armor area, or from the passive upgrade area to the weapon area. You know, it's kind of a shortcut, but it is not the only way to get around the grid.
It's the only way to get to certain bridges. Also, and I'm glad that they did this, the health points for every single one of the Espers has been doubled, the length in which you can use them has been doubled, and their strength has been multiplied as well. And so
so they do things.
They actually do things. You have
Weird.
a long, huge window to use them or their abilities, and plus their health points have been doubled, so is that they can actually be used as damage sponges, kind of like in Final Fantasy X.
Okay, because in my version of the game, they come and then they sometimes attack the target I want them to. Sometimes they just aggro a bunch of people, and then for some reason none of the enemies ever attack the Espers. They go after me, and then they murder the character that summoned the Esper, and the Esper, instead of using its ultimate move, just gets dismissed immediately. And some of the earlier Espers do not have the ability to heal you, so they will just stand there and watch you get murdered. Bellius, while he dealt a ton of damage relative to what my characters could do because they were underleveled, he mostly would just get summoned. Maybe he could take down an enemy or two, and then he'd use his ultimate move and peace out. and it works for me because I gave him to Bosch, and Bosch has no magic, so this is the only thing he can do with his MP. But giving the other espers to other characters, I see no reason to use them as opposed to just using quickenings, because quickenings can do so much more damage, and they don't require you to be survivable at all. You just snap off the super move and the enemy dies. But Mateus is definitely a step up than Belius. Mateus is somewhat useful.
So Gino, can you give me like a little jingle, because I think it's time for Rory and I to talk about our jobs. So it's time for Job Corner.
Tell me about the Zodiac Age.
So, wow. Rory, how have your jobs been? How have your job situation been? Because boy, oh boy, I've been liking it in certain parts, and then I've been absolutely, it's like I said last time, it's anxiety inducing in other parts.
What do you mean by jobs?
So with your characters, like, because here's the problem that I have a very clear A team, and then I got all of these characters that have like compromises that I don't know if I want to continue using them anymore.
Yeah, I've actually been kind of lucky to be over leveled a little bit even now, so I can kind of I usually just cycle in my lowest level characters and not worry about synergy too much, and it works out okay as long as your gamuts are set up in a certain distinct way. Ash for me is still my best character. She's a white mage, time mage, so you can haste, protect, heal, and everything like that. So she's always in for the boss fight. So apart from that, I kind of am agnostic. I kind of try to keep everybody on an even keel level-wise.
Yeah, and I think the problem that I'm starting to have with the Zodiac edition is you have, especially with those DPS characters, you just have so many slots that are using specific item number 2, or like here's a bunch of staves or swords that you're not going to get until like the very end of the game or by completing quest line number 105. And so I don't know what the solution is, but it's really frustrating to have a lot of license points and then to not be able to spend them on something that is tangible right now.
Sure.
Because that's the thing that I'm still continually frustrated by. Like, I love the Gambit slots, but I bought all of them. I bought all the passive buffs. I bought all of the defensive and offensive buffs. And now I just have all of these kind of like equipment slots that I guess, I have the armor that works for me now, but I can buy the armor from like level 1 that I don't need anymore. But I don't know. It's oddly empowering, but then also kind of weird.
Yeah, and some of those equipments you can't even get access to for a good long while, or at all in some cases.
I think, I forget who it was, but I had a character who, there's an entire branch to their license board that's about using bombs. You don't get bombs until like the end of the game, or near the end of the game. I don't know. I think it's good. I like it, but I don't know if it fits with Final Fantasy. I mean, for example, like using Esenas and being able to have the Esena cure all of the maladies rather than just a limited 2 or 3. I don't know if that's worth putting on the license board. Like, I get that like making potions more efficient might make sense, but like that means just at that very beginning of the level, certain items or abilities don't do what you think they do. And you have to kind of decouple yourself from what they mean or what your prior knowledge of Final Fantasy may be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You need to upgrade. You need to earn these items behaving properly.
Or how about all the times where you go up to a treasure chest or you complete a quest and you get this cool item, and then now you have to find out, whose license board is this on? Where is it? And how long is it going to take me to use this thing?
And that, I think, assumes that you're going to look up a guide online, because for most of these spaces on the board, it will tell you that there will be a weapon unlock, but not which one. So you need to actually look up the grid to see who would even have access to it eventually.
Yeah.
Which is annoying. And as someone who's playing the game the way the authors intended, it's way worse. For me, the grid, it's like I mentioned before, there's kind of an augment section, a magic section, a technique section, an accessory section. Each of the sections is its own quadrant on this gigantic board, and there's no good reason to go down some of the spokes other than you found an item that you can use, and now you want to use it. Like, half of the weapon board feels like I'd never need to go down it because it's all of these weapon types that are not more powerful than the weapons you get in the ordinary kind of weapons. Like, swords are towards the middle of the grid, and everyone kind of starts in the middle, and so getting to the high-level swords doesn't cost that much LP. But if you want to get to, like, the basic katanas, you have to travel pretty far on the board to even get access to them, and they are not that much stronger, if at all stronger, than a regular sword. So just like unlocking swords and shields for everyone is totally viable, and there's no good reason to not do that other than flying enemies. But even in that case, the bows are near the swords. So there are certain items that are easier to get for every character, and they behave the same, and they are priced similarly. So it's really just, do you want to have this sort of flavorful composition of your characters, or do you want everyone to just be effective in the exact same way? And for now, I've been diversifying my characters because the quickenings kind of encourage you to have characters go in extreme directions on the board. But other than that, my characters all play the same.
Now,
and they're all fine.
If we want to have like a quick little discussion of how I feel like this game struggles to find the balance between old school Final Fantasy and new school sensibilities, there is nothing more frustrating than finding out that there are certain abilities, magic spells, techniques, that are hidden in random treasure chests in the environment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What the
I hope
fuck?
you didn't want this particular gambit.
Or gambits. Like, I don't... The whole point of this game is, like, being able... And then the other frustration is, like, there are certain merchants that you, especially, like, the later levels, that sell all of the high-tier spells, and those spells will never be accessible in the stores from Rabanastre or earlier. And so you have to go to each sales merchant and check to make sure that they have stuff. And then sometimes when you progress the story, they'll have new items or new abilities or new things to sell. But the thing that just drives me bonkers, like off the wall, is having to double check a guide to make sure that I didn't miss picking up a potentially important spell, gambit, or technique from the environment. Because so much of this game is devaluing the treasure chests because they're so... They normally just have like 4 or 6 gil, and if you wear the armlet, they have knots of rust usually. And I don't know who thought it was a good idea to hide these important abilities in treasure chests, but bad. It's bad.
Okay, so the end of the Still Shrine, you get through there, you get a sword. The sword is supposed to be able to cut Nethicite, and initially Ash is going to test it on the Dawn Shard. But when she's going to cut the Dawn Shard, it releases some mist, and she sees a vision of her dead husband. Razzler. And she cannot bring herself to destroy this artifact. And it seems like, I guess, the Dawn Shard is kind of trying to defend itself, in a way, by showing her things that she wants to see, offering her something that she can't have anymore. So even though the Dawn Shard is supposed to be this object of kind of neutral power, it becomes clear that the Nethicite, something about these crystals, they seem to have some kind of sentience or something to them.
Well, it's around this point when I think the story starts to add in an unnecessary layer. In a story that already has as many layers as an onion, you start to see weird visions and ghosts, and whenever you meet someone that's been contaminated with Nethicite, you see a weird, like, Grim Reaper-like figure behind them. It starts out really quick, just these weird
pulling
interjections.
The strings, almost.
It's almost like there's something pulling the strings, kind of like there's going to be this ass-pull boss at the end of a Final Fantasy game. But yeah, it's during this time when I really think that the story starts to bite too much, or it basically starts to muddle. It starts to get a little muddy because we already have this geopolitical stuff. We already got all these character moments. Now we need to have the puppet master story dynamic. Like, who's calling the shots? Is it actually Vayne, or is it this weird thing that's contaminating people?
Yeah, and when you get back to the mountain, basically Vayne's army, they've created some sort of airship that can fly up to the mountain. The mountain used to be protected because airships didn't work there. But Vayne's ships were able to fly right in, drop off Judge Bergen, who is the angriest of the judges, and he basically murders a bunch of holy men and then kills the leader of this religious sect who was trying to help you and give you...
Who, we find out, has been holding refugees from the war.
They've been taking in refugees and feeding people, and Vayne's armies basically come, kill a bunch of refugees for no reason, attack this holy space, and they kill the leader of this religious sect, and then you have to fight Judge Bergen. And the motivation that he describes is that Nethicite used to be, it was this like physical good that the Dynast King, the, I guess, ancestor of Ash, he was able to find some, and that allowed him to create an empire. But ultimately, he was just getting these scraps of power by happenstance. But Vayne is going to take control of Nethicite and of that power and put it in the hands of man instead of the hands of gods. And that was going to be the key to Arcadia's rise. And then you see kind of the shadowy figure behind him, and he attacks you and says, you know, this blade that I've got in my hand is as good as any Dynast King's blade.
Yeah. I like it. I just feel like, again, if that's the whole point of Vayne as a character, it's like, hey, let's stop messing around with this fuddy-duddy magic stuff. Let's stop being one with the environment. Let's take control of the environment and make it ours. That I think that should be the basis of the story. Is like Vayne is crossing a line that he shouldn't cross, and he's meddling with things. But yet, we need to have this puppet master story element. Like there's this ominous figure that's controlling people and giving them these thoughts, so they're not actually reaching these conclusions. So is Vayne and Dr. Sid, are they actually evil, or have they been contaminated? And I feel like that's the disappointment I have with this story is if Vayne's whole dynamic is, it's like, you know what? Let's go back to the old ways of things where we controlled the environment. We made it our own. Let's unite. Let's bring back the Dynast King. I'll happily be the Dynast King. I'm going to unite everyone as under one empire, and we're going to own our own destiny. Let's forget all this environmental stuff. Let's forget all this stuff. Let's come back together, and let's this is that he has the framework of telling. They have the framework of telling like the dangers of like the intoxicating effect of dictators and authoritarianism, and yet it has to muddle it with like, oh, there's
mind
like this
control.
Mind control factor. So yeah, there's that. Again, it's disappointing. It's disappointing because I think that they, in and of itself, Vayne is a great character. I would have preferred that Vayne has reached his own conclusion based off of his own experiences with politics. I think like him talking about how, man, the Senate is super corrupt. I'm gonna be a better leader than all these corrupt officials who are taking bribes and bickering. Like, actually, like, go with that.
That makes more sense. Yeah, he had motivation. He might be an egomaniac, but that is a characteristic. That is a characteristic that is his own, that you could understand. And it was a conflict that made sense. But once you add mind control into it, all of a sudden you lose some of that allegorical weight. Yeah. And you lose some of the intrigue of the characters. And I think they've done this they managed to do this in almost every Final Fantasy game. Mm-hmm. Like, they create a compelling villain and then set up a puppet master behind them who is infinitely less interesting. So why not? Why not 12 as well?
Yeah.
Did you have any trouble with Judge Bergen? I killed him in one quick and
the thing about Judge Bergen, I think maybe Mr. Rory, you can say the same thing. Judge Bergen is good old-fashioned gear check.
Which one? Was he on the airship?
No, the one after the airship that kills the basically the Dalai Lama.
I don't recall having any problems at all.
I think yeah. The problem with some of the weird thing is that like these boss battles, other than the Espers, like the actual boss battles are way easier than anything you experience in the environment.
definitely.
That's what I was going to say.
There are some that are really challenging, like the Mandragora was really tough if you don't know what you're doing. But but yeah, there are definitely enemies in the world that are way more tough to get through than some of the bosses.
And I think that hurts the resonance of the story. Like, this is supposed to be an accomplishment. You've been presented the idea that the judges are not to be trifled with, and to have him, like, fall pretty easily in battle, or any of the other bosses. Like, you beat George Giss, like, twice. I think that hurts, like, the judges
Bergen,
as a concept.
They say, like, he's got nethicite bound into his bones. And then I literally used one quickening, and he died. He just killed over. And that it was hardly even a fight. But if I use those same quickenings on some enemies I run into just on the world map, it doesn't even kill them sometimes. It's super weird. Like, I inflicted almost 20,000 damage, I think, in one quickening. And then sometimes if you attack the wrong turtle on the road, it will be level 50 and then just murder you immediately. This game's weirdly balanced.
It's even more balanced in our version of the game because they don't want you to be so. I know I worried about it, but like all of the job combinations are fairly balanced. I think the only time is like when you like seriously mess up and like give a support class to a character who should not be your support class character. But otherwise, I think the game for the Zodiac edition is even more balanced. Where the balance starts to peter off, because the next section is kind of returning.
I think it's this.
Is to like going to Rabanastre and you have your first interlude. There's the next segment after this in the Mosphoran highways, but where I really start to get frustrated with this game are the hunts.
Oh, okay. Because I didn't keep doing hunts here,
I know
and
you
I
didn't
started
keep doing the
having
hunts,
problems here.
but I don't know, Rory. It's the problem I have with the hunts is you end up spending, I think, 90% of your time not even doing the battle. It's going to the petition board or Mont Blanc, finding out which hunts are active, then having to figure out where the person who petitioned for the hunt in the first place is, talking to them, listening to their long-winded, assy story that goes on forever, then having to find the environment where the monster is, deducing what the requirements are to make it spawn.
Which are usually impossible to do without a strategy guide.
Yeah, there's one, Gino. There's one where you have to create an all-female cast, a party. And there's nothing about it that hints that you need to create an all-female party in order to make it spawn. That's the requirement.
It's not the Lecher's snake or something?
It's not the Lecher's snake. It's just some sort of fucking flan monster. And the one that I'm stuck on right now, and you'll get a kick out of this, Gino.
Is it the Big Daddy flan?
No, it's the one that I'm stuck on right now is an invisible chocobo.
Awesome.
So it's a partially invisible chocobo, and it only has a spawn rate of 30%. So I have to go into the environment, check out every part of the environment, which is still littered with trash mobs, check it. Oh, it's not here? Leave the environment, come back, check the environment again. Still not here. Leave the environment, check it. It is here. And oh, by the way, the first part of it will run away and leave the battle, and then I have to do this all over again. And then the last part of the battle is apparently chocobos can summon meteors on tap without any penalties to their MP pool. So this thing just summons meteors. And the hunts are unfairly designed, in my opinion, especially if you don't know what you're signing up for. And, like, the order of the hunts is not indicative of how difficult they are. Sometimes, like, the third hunt's harder than the 15th hunt.
So, Rory, question here. As someone who's played a lot of MMOs, how close is this game's hunt design to MMO boss design and encounter design?
Pretty far off, I would say. Like, I mean, for the most part, I played WoW, I played FF14, I played, the Old Republic. I played a lot of MMOs. This is a really obscure way of going about making people find stuff, and it really feels like it's obscure enough to the point where you really do have to find a strategy guide to get most of these hunts after the first, 5 or 6. Whether that's intentional and a way to make them sell more strategy guides, I couldn't say, but honestly, the end result is I don't really care about hunts after. It's so hard to do. You're warping around everywhere. You have to find the person to talk to, and then you have to find the where to go to find the monster. And then even when you find the monster, a lot of the times they have this weird, obscure method of killing them that you don't know right off the bat, and you have to kind of look it up later. So it's such an exhausting way of going about this like side quest mission. And I complain a little bit. It sounds like whinging, but the end result is that I really don't care about the hunt system in this game. I'm sure there's great rewards later on, but for the most part, you get like, hey, 3 teleport stones and 1,000 gil, and like that's not
that
at
won't
all.
buy me shit.
I know. I'm sure later on the hunts are worthwhile for what you get for them, but the difficulty level compared to the time that you spend in them versus the rewards so far, I don't want 100. I don't really care about 100% in games, but the hunt system in this game would make me even less likely to do it.
And
I killed the infamous legendary tortoise, and now I can afford 1/3 of a boot. Thank you, game.
Yeah.
It took me 2 hours to do it. I got 50 license points and enough money to afford an upgrade to one of my character's hats.
Yeah.
Dope. Yeah, this game, it's infamous for this, and it's even more infamous for some of the later, like, high-end enemies. But I think at least the early hunts, I feel like if you're doing them, you should be well ahead of whatever your equipment needs are for the main storyline. But it feels like even if you're doing the hunts, you still need to grind levels and grind money if you're not stealing from everything. And it's an annoying design decision. It forces you to just keep playing more and more and more of this game instead of just at some point feeling like you're good and you can just play and enjoy the story.
So none of y'all are going to try and beat legendary elite hunt Yazamat, who has 5 million hit points? None of y'all are going to try that?
I'm not going to leave the game running overnight so that my characters can kill Yazamat while I'm sleeping. No.
Yeah,
I'm not going to do that.
Parts of this game are just bizarre.
I tried to put my controller and like wedge it so that my characters were constantly moving so that it would grind while I wasn't there. So maybe my characters would do that for me. And it turns out that the enemies stopped spawning in areas, so I couldn't even do that.
That's another thing that I guess for your version of the game, Gino, is grind. Even though this game has such a grind-heavy focus, the original PS2 version, it's not efficient to grind. And
it's not.
When that's the conceit of the game, it's doubly frustrating because like for us, we can like play at 4 times the speed and then all of these slimes that I'm just grinding away on just disappear within like 20 seconds. But if I were playing it in normal speed, all of those slimes would take like 5 minutes to clear out. And then in order to have the slimes come back, I have to leave 2 screens away. And then now I have to deal with 2 load screens and then come back, which is another 2 load screens, and running. You look like you're walking in molasses.
Yeah, that's basically what it is for me when I grind. And I've gotten to the point where grinding LP requires you to basically go back to the first level because everything drops LP, like Rory, you encouraged me to earlier.
Yeah.
I just went back to the Ester Stand or the Wester Stand and just grinded those enemies because I killed them in literally 1 hit. But that does not get me money. And this game basically has three parallel tracks for your characters kind of being adequate for combat. You've got levels, you've got licenses, and you've got equipment. And each of those needs to be grinded in kind of a different way. There are certain enemies that drop especially good loot for selling, so you need to kill those so that you can have enough money to afford equipment. But then if you want to use the equipment, you need to grind LP. The most efficient way to do that is to go back to the early part of the game and just kill enemies that give you LP, but terrible items and terrible experience. And then if you want experience, you have to go find enemies that are around your level. But killing more than 3 or 4 of those in a row is tough, which makes it really inefficient for grinding LP or even really money because the drop rates on those enemies can sometimes be so bad. Like, they'll give you items that are 2 or 3 steps below what you want. They'll usually have one item that sells for a good amount of money, and then they'll have like 1 or 2 that sell for a bad amount of money, and you are not in control of which one they drop at any given time.
Nope.
So it's just a lot of grinding in different directions.
I still recommend stealing. Like the weird thing about stealing, and I think we'll talk about this boss later on, but they're the macro for stealing is steal if HP is above 90% on an enemy, and theoretically the other 2 party members will be attacking at that point. So you will actually, at some point you'll actually turn that gamut off and attack. But there are weird cases where, like, you will actually have. There's a boss coming up that I'm not sure everybody's gotten to. It has like 4 little robots around him, and if you have the steal gamut turned on, people will just steal forever and not steal anything until you actually turn that off. So stealing for regular enemy encounters is a great way to make money, but it can definitely turn out to be a case where one of your characters is just stealing endlessly without making any money for you if you're not on the ball for that. So stealing is a really, really, honestly, the best way to make money in this game. I always have a character in my party who can steal, and it is just at some point you sell like all the magicite, all the stones, and you just have a boatload of money. So.
Okay, I will try that because I am at the point where I ended up getting stuck because I could not beat a boss. Because I am under-equipped, because I can only afford to equip 1 or 2 characters. So at this point, we've gotten to the mountain, you've beat General Bergen, you get sent on another quest. This time you're going to sneak into Arcades by foot, because flying in would be too obvious. So you need to walk to Nalbina, and then from Nalbina you need to go to... what is the name of this place? The Mosforan High Waste. And then you go to the Silica Wood. In the Silica Wood, you need to go to the end of the woods and then talk to a Moogle who tells you need to get these Moogles to finish this bridge. And then you have to backtrack and get all of the Moogles to finish the bridge. Though they do have the kindness of, after you backtrack, they will teleport you to the end, which is nice.
So again, the story hits an emotional high point and then follows it up with 3 open-world dungeons.
Yes. And
each with their own fetch quest or conceit, other than the Mosforan High Waste, which you can just blow through.
Yes. Then you go to the Fawn Coast, which you run into some hunters there, and this is where I could no longer afford the items. Fun fact about the Fawn Coast, for people who are playing the old version of the game, there's a weapon called the Zodiac Spear.
Oh, yeah.
That there are certain treasure chests that if you open them, they just prevent you from getting the Zodiac Spear. They just take the treasure chest that the Zodiac Spear was going to be in, and they replace it with garbage. And you do not, without a guide, you will not know which treasure chests there are that do that. Some of them are kind of obvious because they're treasure chests that would imply that you're stealing from someone. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a treasure chest in a home or something like that. And if you take those, then the spear goes away. But on the Fawn Coast, there's a section where there's a grid of 4x4 or 5x5 of treasure chests. And they're all full of money and knots of rust. 4 of those treasure chests, if you open them, also prevent you from getting the spear. Cool. And they're just in an ordinary environment, with enemies. They just look like regular treasure chests.
Again, it's almost like some of these gameplay decisions were made to sell strategy guides in 2006. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
You're just guessing.
Look, I'm not here to rock the boat or anything, but I'm going to say that maybe setting up a grid with treasure chests in it that fuck you from getting the strongest weapon in the entire game, and you don't figure that out until... And this is 30 hours into the game, and you won't see the spear until, even later into the game. And you have to start all over again if you open any of them. Yeah.
So it's around here.
Fuck.
The Fawn Coast is where we also learn about Balthier's backstory. And
yes.
It's a great backstory, but it's so weirdly told during this segment of the story. So you end up coming to the Fawn Coast, and what happens is Penelo and Vaughn are playing in the sand, splashing water in their face. And then there's like this whimsical, lighthearted music that's playing while Balthier is telling this heart-wrenching tale of his father being corrupted by the desire of Magicite and how he used to be a judge.
Nethicite. You say it right.
Nethicite. And he's just telling this heart-wrenching story about how he had to run away from his father, and he's been running away from his past again. So we got two characters that are running away from their past in the same game. And just this whimsical fantasy music's playing while we watch Vaughn and Penelo splash water at each other, and they're playing on the beach. And Balthier is just saying all of this all of the sudden because now it's time for him to have his character moment.
Yeah, and we also get Ash kind of having a flashback with her husband where they're expressing that their marriage will be viewed from the outside as being one of convenience and alliance, but secretly they're actually in love.
So, Gino, I know you don't ever do this, but there's a manga adaptation of Final Fantasy XII.
What?
There's a manga adaptation of Final Fantasy XII, and it's all about Rosler and Ash's relationship and why they fell in love. And actually, it was a marriage of convenience. And eventually, when they both survive an assassination attempt from the Neo-Rosarians...
Oh, no.
They survive an assassination attempt. They come to love each other.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
It's a shame that's not in... Actually, no. There's too much in this game.
Yeah,
so
there's too much in this game.
They left it out.
Just Balthier has, like, exposition diarrhea in the Fawn
I like
Coast.
his story, though.
I like his story, but it's like all of his storytelling is, like, beginning to end in like, 15 minutes of this this Fawn Coast segment where he just says everything all at once, and there's no preempting him, or there's no preemption of why he feels comfortable talking. Like, we don't have this effective relationship between the characters. They're just strung together in this thing. The only real effective relationship that you feel is Thrawn and Balthier, Penelo and Vaughn. I guess you could say Bosch and Vaughn, but they haven't really written that relationship very well at this point. And
Bosch hasn't spoken, it feels like, in 10, 12 hours.
And he has such a really good, interesting start in the beginning, and then he's just put on stasis for so long. And, Balthier it's a lot of storytelling in a very short amount of time.
Yeah. After this segment, you go from the Fawn Coast, you go to the Cheetah Uplands. Then you go from there to the Sochin Cave.
Can we just talk about these names? Fuck.
We've already talked about it.
The Sochin Caves.
Well, you need to go from the Sochin Caves. You need to get the Soul Ward key so that you can go into the Hall of Lament. The Hall of Lambent Darkness.
Where you fight the what's it called? Mandragoras? Like the
Mandragoras.
Oh my god. That fight was really frustrating because if you're not familiar, there are 5 little onion dudes who somebody heals, somebody attacks, and they all run away as soon as you get them like on low life. So you really have to control your party really carefully. Or you can do you can do quickenings and try to burn people down. But man, this
battle sucks so much.
It was really bad.
So for me, what would always happen is like when you're trying to like zone one in by itself, what would happen is like if all those 5 Mandragons honed in on one character, that character's dead. But if you're just fighting 1 or 2, you're fine. But once all 5 of them came together or congealed onto one character, that character's dead. There's no going up from that. He's dead. Yep. And they're so fast. They run away. I mean, and then if you let them go, so like there would be 3 that would attack me, then 2 would run away and heal each other, then come back to the battle. Oh my god. And then there's one that hits you with like nothing but like fucking status effects. And so now I have to spend time using remedies or healing items, and then that's lost time, or that's a lost turn on a character.
So for me, I unleashed a 23-hit quickening chain
Damn.
to start this fight when they were all close to each other, and then that one was very dead. And then the two that were adjacent to it got hit for about 8,000 damage off of the quickening finisher, and so I just ran into a corner and punched each of them once and they died. And then the other two that were surviving had huddled into a corner trying to heal themselves, and then I swapped in my secondary party and unleashed a 17-hit quickening chain on them,
Damn.
and that murdered them. So all of my characters at this point in the game have level 3 quickenings, and so I can unleash 2 full salvos of level 3 quickenings if I want. That made short work of this boss fight.
There's a puzzle later.
I didn't do the puzzle. I
Wait,
ignored
was the puzzle optional?
The waterfall puzzle, yeah.
Fuck! I thought it was required.
No, I ran right past it, and this is where I'm stuck right now. I'm up to the Ahriman,
man.
so the Ahriman has like 62,000 health. My quickening chains can deal about 38,000 damage in one hit. That's what I've been able to do pretty routinely against him.
So
but
how good
he
are quickenings
teleports
when you have a teleporting boss?
That's the problem. So the first hit I can get in cleanly. Once he teleports away, that's fine. But then once he starts duplicating himself, you can't hit him until all of the clones are gone.
It's really tough.
And surviving, I need to have my party survive until he's back to being a normal character again. And then if I can just snap off a second quickening, he should die. But I've just had real trouble.
There are gamuts for having 4 or 3 or 5 or more enemies in one location. So you might want to try putting up a hey, if there are 3 or more people in one location, do a fire god or something like that, because that might help to hit them all at one time. Because I had the same problem where at the end of that fight I was really close to dying, and then there was like 5 of them around, and every one of my party members was attacking a different one. But there are gamuts for having hey, if there are 5 enemies real close by, just cast whatever you got and make it a big ass quake guy or arrow guy or lightning guy or whatever, and that might help get through that.
I also want to say that this game of the PlayStation 2 or even the PlayStation 1 era might have some of the most debilitating status effects I have ever seen in the 3D era of Final Fantasy game. Maybe short of Paralyzed from the Final Fantasy 1 through 3, Immobilize might well be one of the worst status effects I have ever seen.
Even slow, there's Stone, there's Doom, but all the weird thing about it is if you get hit with something like slow or poison, it lasts forever. Yep. Unless you heal it. It really does stick around for a very long time.
And again, sometimes you have these things, you have items like remedies, but if you haven't been leveling up the slot on the skill board or the license board, remedy's only going to treat maybe 1 or 2 of those things. So I have to constantly decouple the meaning, or it's okay, which character actually has the ability to use potions that are super cool or
that are good?
Yeah, that are good, or remedies that are good. And oh man, and Asuna, as I found out during this boss especially, Asuna does not cure slow or stop or Asuna doesn't cure all of the negative status effects.
Nope.
There are some
Stone. A lot of things it doesn't work on.
Doom.
Yeah, this game has some really, really devastating status effects, and here's a problem that I've noticed in Final Fantasy XII. It's not really easy to tell which status effects you have. It flashes them on your kind of the list of the names, but it flashes them so quickly. And it uses
if you have multiple, it's trouble.
And if you have multiple, it's trouble. And then also when you actually try to queue up your attacks to see what the elemental weaknesses of the boss are, it's not easy to see what those elemental weaknesses are. There's a scan. Is there a scan ability in Final Fantasy XII?
It's Libra. It's Libra.
It's Libra, but when you look at the characters,
it doesn't always work.
It doesn't always work, or the information is not really easy to discern or parse out.
Yeah. So for me, I haven't been caring that much because I do have a guidebook. That has helped me, but with the status effects, I don't understand why in this game they decided that they should have a different curative spell for every fucking one.
Yeah.
Like, there's Stona that you use for stone. There's Vox that you use for silence. There's Blindna, which you use for blind. There's Poisona, which you use for poison. You use Esuna that will get rid of most of these, but not all of them. Why? It's just like needless to have to menu through all of these. It makes your menus much less usable because you've got, what, like a quarter or more of your White Mage menu is just specific curative spells? And it just pads out the number of licenses you need. Because if you want to get through different sections of the game, you will run into areas where they afflict you with specific ones of these statuses more than others. And if you don't have at least one character who can cure them for free, you're just burning money on items. And some of these items aren't cheap.
Sorry. And it makes editing your Gambit system even harder because then you already have this long mountain of things where it's like, okay, if your ally is this. And then also something that's kind of frustrating, you possibly have to use a Gambit for ally and then also for self because you can't cast a Gambit. A use on ally Gambit does not count for the person who's casting that spell. So you also have to plan for either another character to have all of these items, just in case you have a status effect cast on you, or you have to waste a second one or a second slot for all of those status effects so as that the person can save themselves from dying of poison.
Yeah, and I think that that's worth mentioning. If you, for gambiting purposes, an ideal world you would gambit if negative status effect, right? If anything, Esuna. And it's one thing. It's just one gambit slot. But the way this actually works is each of these curative spells kind of aligns with a different status effect. Now, you can make it so Esuna is what you use regardless of what status effect you have, but I don't think that there's a gambit for any status effect, right? There's ones for if poisoned, if sleep,
poison,
if blind, if stone, and so they've parsed it out into each of these status effects specifically. So if you want to, be as safe as possible and have one generic answer, you probably need to dedicate like 3 or 4 gambit slots just to covering your bases on the most basic status effects that you think you'll be afflicted with. They're so close with the gambits to making a system that you can automate to just deal with most encounters and most problems, but they don't hit it. It's not correct for that. You don't have enough slots.
12,
you don't have
12
enough
slots
flexibility.
is not enough to do what you want to do. If 15, 20, maybe you could make it flexible, but 12 is really, really tough.
Yeah.
Or they just had to lower the number of it. They just needed like one thing that was like if negative status or like if enemy buffed, just any buff. Use dispel.
And I don't like how a lot of these status effects are basically duplications or different renditions of the same thing. You have stone, stop, slow, immobilize,
Petrify.
disable, blind. They're all the same thing, which is your character loses a turn in a real-time combat system.
Well, stone and petrify, I do not know the difference between them.
I think those are the same.
Yeah.
They're two different actually afflictions because you can be stoned, and if you have the gambit set up for if ally stone, the thing, it will not work. But if it's petrify, you have to have a separate gambit for it to make it work. So
I think stone is
the end of petrify. I'm not sure.
So yeah, one's a countdown that at the end of it you end up petrified. So I think one of them is when you've got the countdown on you, and the other one is when you're turned to stone. But like, why? Why have those be different?
I'm not sure.
Or why? Yeah, and then also
the answer's the same.
Why have petrify and immobilize? And
well, one of them you're
stop.
dead. One of them you can't move.
Yeah.
Disable and immobilize are two different things. That's also two different things. One of them you can't move. The other one you can't take actions. As if being able to move in this game but not take actions is useful. It's your character being completely hamstrung. Not really that different. But they've, like you said, ZP, there are 12 different ways that they can say your character's useless.
Yeah, it's like 12 different ways that your character is useless. And I know we haven't...
Sleep?
Yeah. Yeah, there's also sleep in this game.
Confuse.
And so I'm trying to play this game kind of with like an MMORPG mentality where it's like I got to have my tank, I've got to have my healer, I've got to have my support magic class, I've got to have these roles. And you know what's super frustrating is when like something like decoy or green magic, you cast it and then it missed. And so you have to keep casting decoy onto your tank so that it can aggro. And apparently this really important ability in order to have the functions of a tank, apparently it can miss. Or apparently Bubble, which is a pretty expensive green magic spell, can miss as well. And I don't know why.
Well, your person just needs to get better at magic, clearly. If they just held still, they could have cast the spell properly. But well, I think this is where we got to stop because I'm stuck here. I was hoping to get to Dr. Sid, but I was not able to defeat the Ahriman yet. But I think for the next time, we're going to try and wrap this game up.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Let's try and finish it
Ahriman,
for our next podcast.
Ahriman was tough.
Ahriman is tough, and it doesn't help that there's two boss battles in a row, and they're both difficult.
Yeah, Mandragora's was like I really had to fought my way through that one, and Ahriman was kind of lucky over leveled, but after this, I feel like after Ahriman, like Sid wasn't too hard. And the enemies from here on in aren't too hard. I haven't gotten too far past, but
and
Ahriman
that
is
dungeon
definitely
with all
really
the
tough.
undead. Yeah, I'm sorry. And that dungeon with all the undead enemies, not fun at all. No,
But not too terrible.
not too
I
terrible.
don't know because I run through it. I literally can't fight any of those enemies without depleting all of my magic and health. So I am running through there, running from the save point to Ahriman. And there's one room right before Ahriman where there's only one enemy. So I kill that guy. And then I'm able to heal my party to the point where I can fight the boss. But I'm at the point where I'm just like, okay, I need to make left, right, right. Like that scene in Silent Hill where she's memorizing all the moves because if she stops for even a second, she'll get killed. I'm just doing that. So I'm memorizing the map, hoping that I don't get murdered on the way there. And then when I get there, I hopefully will just do 2 quickenings and he'll die. That's the plan.
All right. Yeah. So I guess all of our wonderful hot takes about Pinewood chops are coming up in the next episode.
What?
Don't you
What
remember
about Pinewood?
Don't you don't remember that from the first time you played this game? Collecting all the chops, so is that you can use the cab in order to get to Draclor Laboratories?
Oh no, I didn't remember that.
Do you remember that sequence where you have to like play matchmaker?
It's not that bad.
I didn't remember that.
It's just
yeah.
Yeah, it's just another example. Or how about in Draclor Laboratory where you have to go and do the blue and red switches so as that you can open different...
God, it should be... I feel dumb for not realizing how easy it was, but I probably spent about an hour in there on level 68.
I did too. Yeah, like...
I didn't remember that.
It's like no environment from this point forward is allowed to just be an environment. It also has to be an environmental puzzle filled with trash mobs, and then also a puzzle. And something that, because I did the waterfall puzzle, normally Final Fantasy games have the common courtesy of disabling encounters when you're trying to solve a puzzle. Final Fantasy XII says, nah, son.
This game surrounds the puzzle pieces with enemies.
Yeah. It's like even like Final Fantasy VII knew when to disable random encounters.
Yo, dog, you trying to read something?
Yeah. Yo,
oh, that's weird. There's skeletons here.
Yo, dog,
it seems hard to read.
Yo, dog, you're trying to solve the piano puzzle in Final Fantasy X too? All right, fine.
Solve your puzzle.
Man, yeah, just some of the environments in this game are just obtuse as fuck as to where you need to go, what you need to do, and how do you go from point A to point B.
Well,
but the good news is the story gets good, Gino.
Yep. The story will get good soon. I will get some more summons. I will get to learn who these espers are that I keep casting in the Final Fantasy trading card game because I had forgotten. But Famfrit's real good, and I know he's in here somewhere.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you both. Thank you, ZP.
Yep.
No problem. Rory.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully, so next podcast will be the entire end of the game.
That's the plan.
We'll see what we can do.
And thank you, listeners. Remember, if you want to get in touch with the show, you can do so at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got comment sections, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. Get in your Final Fantasy XII hot takes. If you would like to explain why this game is fast-paced, frenetic action, please write in. And till next time, peace!